All right. So we are here today back with another episode of the Uncaped Mama podcast. I'm joined by an amazing guest, Debi, who is going to chat with me about rebuilding your relationship with yourself. And I'm so excited because I know that there's so much to learn. And I think this is a really good topic for mamas. And so, of course, if you're here, make sure you like, subscribe, share. Definitely want you to engage as well with my guest on her socials, on her website, in her event. She's going to share all of that in a moment. And I also want you to remember that here at Uncaped Mama, this is a place for you to just be. You don't have to be a super mom here. Just be you. We're going to talk about all sorts of things that impact moms and motherhood and the journey. And I think this is a really important one to think about. And also, I think this one's really relevant to a lot of parents. And maybe parents who like are new parents, but have a tough relationship with their parents. So let's jump right in on talking about rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Debi, please tell us a little bit about you and the work you do, and then we're going to jump into our conversation.
Okay, so I never expected to be the coach and the trainer that I am. But I've been walked into this journey by my life experience of being disconnected from my only child through divorce and then post-divorce abuse. I'm now disconnected from grandchildren as well. So it's a generational issue. It's not just my issue or my daughter's issue. But the far wider impact is grandparents, my parents, both of now who are dead, but my parents, their siblings, my siblings, all of these connections that my daughter had that suddenly stopped being in her life because she closed the door to everybody due to the experience she was having of what was going on. And I couldn't protect her from that. So my journey has been a journey of learning to understand grief, because grief isn't just death. Grief is actually the loss of our hopes, dreams, and expectations for anything that we experience in our lives. And that actually happens while we're in the womb, as we're being born, as we're growing up. We experience all different things, and we do experience things in the womb because we feel the sensations of the experience our mother is happening, in her life. And we hear, but we also taste, because the body changes in its chemical balance. So we're experiencing from the moment we're in the womb. So then we come out into the world with beliefs. And a lot of people go, oh, no, that's not true. But we come out of the world with beliefs because we come out of the world with feelings that we can't explain. And we don't know why we're carrying them, and we don't know where those things are coming from. So I've had so much learning on this journey of all of the different experiences in my life that impacted me as a wife and a mother, that informed how I lived or didn't, because I didn't always make the right choices, because I didn't know that I was carrying beliefs that were guiding me in the wrong direction or not guiding me with a purpose that served me. So this journey of becoming a coach has been finding myself and understanding that I wasn't the one that was responsible for an awful lot of those things, because I didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
But I'm responsible for how I react and respond. And reaction is an anger type of experience, whereas respond is a considered type of experience. So as I've gone from that one place of not being happy and comfortable, I've gone into that other place of being more secure in myself, more confident in myself, and more able in myself. And that's what I aim to do for my clients.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I like the focus on self. And we're going to talk about that a ton. Let's jump into the pain of estrangement, and the pain that may come with loss. And can you explain like what parental alienation and estrangement, like what is that, and how they impact mothers emotionally, mentally, and even physically?
Absolutely. So parental alienation is a term that's been used for quite some years now to describe what is essentially an abusive behavior by one adult towards their child or children in separating them from another adult, namely their mother or father. It used to be a time when it was incredibly common for it to be men, 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 but actually there are hundreds and thousands of women all over the world, and I'm connected to a lot of them, who, have experienced this journey of thinking they were going to have a healthy relationship breakup, or whatever that may look like, whether it's a marriage or just a relationship, only to find that the other adult is suddenly creating a war against them, stopping them seeing their children, stopping their children having any engagement with their grandparents or their aunts and uncles or their cousins. So the children become detached from half of who they are. But the parent that is actively doing that behavior is not doing it with the child's best interest at heart. They're doing it with their own interest at heart, because they want to harm the other parent. Because no child is going to turn around and say that they hate their mother or they hate their father unless there's been an abuse that they've lived with for a continuous amount of time. And for the vast majority of us that experience alienation, there is no abuse. There are no safeguarding issues. So that's parental alienation. Estrangement very often goes hand in hand with alienation, because as the children become older and they've become more and more psychologically confused and distressed and unable to relate to the parent that's missing, they then grow up and often don't feel safe knowing how to reconnect with the parent. They either go headlong in, and because they're all carrying a lot of upset and anger and a lot of grief that's unresolved, it can be a very rocky journey. And so they pull away again, and then they pull away again, and they come back and pull away again, because they find it difficult to reconnect, because we've got our own grief going on. Yeah. They've got their own grief going on, and it's a little bit like two boulders rubbing alongside each other, but nothing to bring them together fully. So there's often a lot of miscommunication. And of course that, you can't be bothered with me, you're not making the effort, you're not doing you, I'm going. And they walk away. And then the other point for estrangement actually is that often, especially our youngsters these days, become very overwhelmed with what's going on in the world, what's going on in their daily lives, what the expectations are from society and from school and, from all these different places. And they become so overwhelmed, they just have to get off the bus, so to speak, and go in the opposite direction. And that can also be that their parental expectation is so high, but we want you to do this, you've got to go to college, you've got to go to university, blah, blah, blah. And these expectations can become so overwhelming. Your child's just going to go, hey, sorry, can't cope with that. And I don't know how to tell you I can't cope with that, for fear of you being upset with me.
Yes.
Or worse, because people hold money over their children as well. I'll cut your allowance off and all these things. And so it's a slippery slope, and our sort of teens, into early adults can slide into that so quietly that we don't realize it's happening, and then all of a sudden there's silence.
Yeah.
Because they've cut us off. And it's the cutting off without communication that is one of the most painful parts of the journey for many people. Because if you don't understand why, and you've never been given an opportunity to have a conversation, then it makes it nigh on impossible to deal with the overwhelm of emotions that you're feeling at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Because you start to judge and criticize yourself without understanding why. But then that's where all these things that happened whilst you were in the womb and whilst you were growing up are starting to open up and come to life again in your head. Our unconscious mind carries every single experience, whether it's a visual, a hearing, a smell, a taste, a feeling. We can feel energy all the time, but we don't always know that. But our unconscious mind is absorbing all of those things all the time, 24/7, even when we're asleep. Mm-hmm. And so whatever those things were that we swallowed down and took into our unconscious minds when we were very young, our unconscious mind's job is to protect us. So now it's going, well, I've got some of those familiar feelings inside. I'm going to go and find them, and I'm going to stick them all together. So it finds all the stuff from when you were very young, and it sticks it to all the stuff that you're experiencing now. So then you get this double whammy of emotion, and you feel unable to deal with it. And I've been in that place. I know how tough that is. And I can't begin to tell you how horrid it was to wake up and put the makeup on and go to work and force myself to be happy and smiley. Yeah. And, because I was in front of, I worked in a dental practice. I was in front of patients all day long. And then I'd have to deal with a telephone call from the solicitor at lunchtime. But I didn't have a private office to go into to have that conversation. I had to sit in the back office where the staff were, because the phone signal wasn't very good on the mobile, so it had to be on the landline. And of course, it had to be in working hours. You can't talk to a solicitor outside of working hours. Yeah. So I didn't have privacy. And the fear and the guilt and the shame and all those other things made it a very painful process. And then, of course, I would come off the phone and I would be very distressed. And I'd then have to go and sort myself out to put that face back on again, ready for the afternoon at work. And it was horrendous. There were times when I just never felt like I would stop crying. And I can quite happily tell you, I cried rivers and rivers and rivers, because I was in so much emotional distress, because I was trying to have a relationship with my daughter. I didn't know the behaviors and things that were going on for her behind the scenes, creating that push that she had for suddenly becoming someone I didn't know. And then as she was getting older and older, she was pulling away. And I didn't know, and I couldn't see it because I was so deeply seated in my own grief. I didn't see the little tiny things, So it's the gradual slide that happens can be very debilitating.
Yeah. Is the parental alienation and estrangement you're talking about, talk to me about how that's similar or different to an adult child, maybe in their 30s or 40s, who decides to go no contact.
Well, that's estrangement as well, the no contact thing, yeah. So that's very different, because that then is an adult child who is responding to limiting beliefs they've got, or there's an awful lot of social media now that's all about dump your parents. You know, dump your parents, dump your family. They're no good to you. Go no contact. You know, that's the best thing you can do. Everybody's toxic.
Yes.
But actually, what's toxic is being told to just walk away without making time to have a proper conversation.
I agree.
So that both sides can have a proper conversation. So all these parents that are being told, you know, you did this, you did that, you did the other, I'm closing the door on you. And I sat there absolutely flummoxed because they did the best they could with the knowledge and understanding they had. They did the best they could with the finances they had. They did the best they could with their own knowledge of how their parents brought them up.
Yeah.
And societally, each generation has a different way of looking at the past generations. So we grew up with parents who were war babies, you know, or born at the end of the war. So their parents lived with untold fear, lack of communication, because they didn't have the internet.
No.
They didn't have telephones. You know, they relied on...
Barely had television.
No, a lot of them
didn't. Was new.
Exactly. They didn't. And so, you know, they relied on a newspaper if they were able to read, because not everybody could read the way we do now.
Yeah.
They relied on a radio if they had a radio. And for many, many years, people went to the cinema to listen to the news once a week.
Yeah.
You know, so communication now is so different. Yes. So, I mean, I can still remember walking down the road and then up the next road to go and use a telephone box because we didn't have a telephone at home, you know, and I didn't have a television until I was 12. Now I'm 60 and I didn't have a television until I was 12. And that was when my grandfather upgraded his black and white one that he'd bought for the coronation. And he had a colour television and we had the old black and white one.
Wow.
So, you know, a lot of people don't appreciate that actually our children, my daughter, had so many things I never had, you know, and so many experiences I never had.
Yeah.
And I was never worried that she had those experiences. I wanted her to have those experiences. I wanted her to be able to stretch her mind and be excited about trying new things in her world because I'd never had those opportunities.
Yeah.
And a great deal of adults of my age group and a bit older will be recognizing that they also never had those experiences and they did exactly the same. They went all out to allow their own children to have those experiences. But the thing with that is, I think this generation now has become so much more self-entitled. You know, we were children that grew up without things and we were grateful for everything we had. And then as we grew older and our lives became more, I'm going to say financially resplendent, because things became available to us that just weren't there before. Yeah. They became, you know, you can go to a shop and buy practically anything. You can go online now and buy practically anything. Yeah. Whereas when I was a child, there were lots of those things just didn't exist. And you made do and mend with everything. You know, that if you didn't have it, you went without and you saved and saved and saved for it. Well, people buy things on credit now all the time.
All the time, yeah.
You know, so there's a real change in societal structure and there's a change in expectation. And expectation actually can do a lot of damage to relationships.
Yeah.
Because if you expect someone to be able to mind read and know what they've done, because you're telling them, you know what you did, I've been told that, you know what you did. And you think, well, actually, I don't know what I did. If you don't tell me what it is that's upsetting you, how can I make it right? And there are going to be hundreds of men and women that say, Well, yeah, I can agree with that because I've experienced the same thing. How can I make it right? You're telling me you know what you've done, but actually, if you don't tell me what it is that you're telling me I've done, how do I know how to make reparation? How do I know how to make it right?
I like that. I'm glad I asked that question. It's making me think about a personal experience I had. So when I was younger, I was about 7 or 8 years old. My grandma had just broken her ankle and had surgery, and she was in a wheelchair. And my mom got this job opportunity. So I was from Nebraska. My mom got this job opportunity in Minnesota. So where I lived with my grandma and where she was moving to was about 6 hours away on the drive. And we weren't riding airplanes then. We were like very much car people at that point, which I actually enjoyed. And so I thought my mom left me. My child brain said my mom left me and chose my brother over me. Therefore, she loves my brother more than me. This was a whole narrative that I painted, which caused me to have certain actions and behaviors and thoughts and words and things over time. And I remember having a therapist, this was probably 6 or 7 years ago now, who said, have you talked to your mom about this? And I said, she knows she left me. And she's like, did she leave you? And I'm like, yes, of course she left me. Like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, what does your mom say about it? And I'm like, I don't know. She's like, okay, I want you to go have a conversation with your mom and your grandma about what happened, right? Like at that time. And she's like, I really want you to work on clearing your mind and like being open-minded. I just want you to hear, like truly hear what they say. And I want you to make note of what they said. Yeah. It was mind-blowing to find out that a conversation was had with me about what I was comfortable doing. Did I want to go or not? And for me, it was like, well, you sort of struggled with that decision, but you felt safer at that age in a city you knew with your grandma, where you knew where all the stuff was, right? And so you made the decision at that young age to stay. So I go back to therapy and I tell her, and my therapist says, well, did anybody ever check in with you to see if you changed your mind? And I said, I'm not sure. Let me go ask. And they were able to say, actually, no, we didn't check in with you to see if you had changed your mind or if you wanted something different. And honestly, if we had known that, maybe we could have made a different arrangement and you could have gone up there. But at the same time, now that I had the actual information because we had a conversation, I was able to release a lot. I felt abandoned. Right?
Yes. And this is the thing.
Yes. And it turned into, this thing where like, ultimately I was well taken care of. I had a great relationship with my grandma. She actually just passed away in October. It'll be 6 months tomorrow. And so it's tough, but like I was able to have a really close relationship with her. My brother actually was too. And that was my mom's best friend. Right.
Podcast, we definitely discuss healing. We discuss aspects of psychology. We discuss you becoming the best you, mental wellness,
for sure,
health,
femininity, parenthood, dating,
definitely dating,
single parents. And it's from a lens of two psychologists,
Yeah.
So,
but also two people who grew up like with both parents, married parents, and then like you all know that Chloe and I are the youngest of our crews, like her siblings and my siblings. So so it's from that perspective.
Yeah, looking at life through that lens. Yeah. So you're gonna get a whole lot of things from us. From us being women, going through life as parents, and all of these awesome attributes. But yes, womanology, the study of women.
The study of women.
That piece of it could have literally turned into an estrangement. I could have turned into an adult and said, you left me when I was 8, no contact. And my mom would have had no idea. And what I learned from that is that all of us, all human beings, whether you're a child or, you're a senior, right, who, is 90, we all I live in my body with my perspective, my feelings, my emotions, and then my memory, right? Like what got into my memory. And then you've got the other person who's in their body with their feelings, their emotions, their perspective, and their memory, right? And
there's a wonderful phrase, Dom, isn't there?
Yeah.
We all look at life through a different lens.
Yes.
Because that's what we have in our eye, is a lens.
Yes.
So we're looking from our own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, not from anybody else's, even twins. And this is what's the thing about grief that people don't understand. Because we're all so unique, we don't know what someone else is experiencing. Even though our situation may be similar, even though we're siblings within a family, we don't know how our siblings feel when something happens to our mother, our father, our grandparent, another sibling. We just don't know. So when somebody turns around and says to you, I know what that feels like, and you sit there and you wonder why you feel so upset, it's because they're making it about them and not about you. So going back to the estrangement thing of that, you had that thought in your mind, everything in your mind at 7 and 8 years old became about you because you knew nothing else.
Nothing.
And you had no conscious memory, because to be quite frank, if we remembered everything 100% that's up in here, we'd be absolutely bonkers.
Oh, yeah.
Because our mind would be going over and over and over all the time. And it's why our unconscious mind puts 95% of everything we experience every day straight into the back of our mind, straight into our memory box. And if you think about it, there's a wonderful old, and I say old because we were taught about Pandora in the classics, you know, when we did classics and things at school, which they no longer do.
Yeah.
But, you know, Pandora's box was the place for all the pain.
Yes.
So my generation will remember things about Pandora's box and how everything just gets stuffed away in the box.
Yep.
Well, that's basically what our unconscious mind is Pandora's box. So when something like that for you were saying to the therapist, you know, well, no, it was all her. That's because your unconscious mind, that door is going, oh, I'm about to just empty the whole box. I'm about to just go, and everything's going to come out.
Yep.
And this is what happens when we're already in that state of flux and we're already not feeling ourselves and we don't know why. And then we might have a bad night's sleep and we'll wake up the next morning and we'll be going, I have no idea why I feel so bad. That yesterday wasn't so bad, but I've had some sleep and my sleep was terrible. Well, it's because your unconscious mind is going, well, there's stuff going on and there's stuff that's familiar tucked away in the back here. Well, I'm just going to bring it out. I'm just going to, you know, show it the door. And that's what happens. And so you get old stuff, like your 7 and 8 year old, along with your present stuff, and then they're rubbing up and down against each other, but there's nothing to stick them together to make sense of what they are. Yeah. So everything just feels a bit, ugh.
Yeah.
And actually, that's not a nice place to be.
No, it's tough. And I'm thinking about also, you know, some of the nuances that come with choosing not to have a relationship or changing the relationship with someone as an adult, and hearing you talk about, like, as a child, sometimes there's like an abuse situation going on, right, that is impacting this child. And as an adult, there might also be an abusive situation going on.
Yes.
Where you're like, they know they're abusing me. And I think
you see, along with that also, there is the thing that there seems to be a trend. There's something I'm seeing, and it's being talked about a lot. There is a trend of sons coming away from their mothers after they get married. But that's often because the girl feels unsure of the closeness of the relationship between mother and son, because she may not have that closeness with her mother and father. Yeah. So if she doesn't have that closeness, she's going to feel unconsciously threatened.
Yeah.
And so she's going to put pressure on her new husband to detach. Well, your mum doesn't need to do that. I can do that. You know, and then, and very often, something actually that I'm seeing more and more is she's not just encouraging her now new husband to detach from his mother and his family, because they're all so lovely and close and everything's wonderful. She's also detaching from her own family. So then they're becoming isolated in their own bubble. And actually then they don't have the people they need to reach out to when they need support and help. They don't have the people to reach out to when a new baby comes along and they want to celebrate and they want to share that joy with their families. They've become isolated in their own bubble. Or the other mother-in-law feels really threatened by the new mother-in-law. And so she's putting pressure on the daughter or the son to disconnect because she can do it all. It's such a tangled web, but it all goes back to our own experiences in childhood.
Yeah.
So there are so many different ways of looking at relationships that may not be as healthy as we think they are.
Yeah.
But sometimes we don't see it until it's far too late, until we find ourselves in that place of isolation. Yeah. And then we don't know how to get out of it because we don't want to upset our new spouse or their family, if their family are suddenly larger than lives in our life. Or we don't want to make the pressure worse for our new spouse if they're also disconnecting from their own family.
Yeah.
So then we end up in a very judgmental place where we're trying to find ways to live and survive rather than thrive, I would say, is the phrase. Mm-hmm. Because you go into survival mode when you become disconnected from people you love.
Yes.
You thrive when you have people around you who are there to catch you when you fall. But when you don't, you go into survival mode.
Yeah. This is so good. This is so good. So I want to talk about, we talked a little bit about grief and like how that manifests for moms when they're separated. So let's talk more about rebuilding the relationship with self. You know, when a mother experiences this type of loss or any type of loss, right? You already talked about how deeply that affects everything. And so what are some of the biggest identity shifts or struggles that you see? And then how can the mother begin to heal?
So first of all, there is so much doubt that we carry when we don't understand why we're experiencing what we experience. There's fear, lots and lots of fear, but we can't always put a word to what the fear is. There's the guilt and the shame because we feel guilty because we didn't know how to deal with the situation to make it better. And there's the shame of how others look at us, how others speak of us. So it's our self-worth, our value, how we value ourselves, how we're compassionate towards ourselves or not. And I say or not because or not can be a whole slew of behaviors. So it can be going through a divorce and then finding that you don't actually know how to behave in new relationships. So you end up having a half a dozen relationships that aren't very healthy, you know, because you're, for want of a better word, bed hopping, you know, and not really having conversation or taking time to get to know the person.
Yes.
There's self-harm, drugs, drink, smoking, overeating, undereating, too much exercise. And I say too much exercise because how many people do you know that say, oh, I'm really feeling, I'm going for a run. I'm going down the gym. And so they're putting their bodies through continued aggressive exercise. But that means their cortisol levels are higher. And cortisol does a lot of damage within the body without anybody seeing what's happening. Yeah. Because it's invasive. It's like your blood flowing around your system. Cortisol just follows it all as well. And cortisol can cause untold damage to our bodies. Yeah. You know, my body, where I was living with abusive behaviors at home, where I was keeping myself in that place because I was staying for my daughter, meant I was abusing my body without realizing it because I was keeping myself in a stasis of stress and distress. So in the last 2.5 years, over the time just before I left until where would be the 2004 actually through to early 2007, my body started forming a singular gallstone because it couldn't express the calcium buildup that was happening inside my body.
Wow.
It was happening at such speed that my body couldn't physically get rid of it fast enough. So my body was creating this singular gallstone that was just shy of the size of a tennis ball. And it got stuck in my bile duct, and it made me very, very ill to the point that I actually had to have emergency surgery at the beginning of February 2007. So I didn't know I was doing that to myself because I didn't understand the levels of stress and distress I was living with. And that was through the back end of the marriage, the thing that made me actually wake up and see I shouldn't be there anymore, and then the post-divorce abuse that was happening afterwards. Also the divorce abuse that was happening at that point through to the post-divorce abuse. So I was in a constant stasis of stress and distress, and my body was soaking it all up at speed. And along with that, obviously, was the cortisol, which is the thing that brings the major fatigue, because it has that damage that happens to those two little organs that sit on top of your kidneys that are supposed to help everything filter properly. But when your cortisol levels are so high, those organs become unable to do the job. So then you end up with adrenal fatigue. And of course, that has a massive impact on how your body works. But it also activates things like autoimmune conditions.
Yep.
And we often have autoimmune conditions that we don't know about until we go through a very high period of stress and distress. So my body decided to say to me, well, the gallstone's not enough. You're now going to have fibromyalgia as well. And I came out of the surgery thinking, oh, phew, I'm alive. I can get better now. And then 2 months later, when I went back to work, I was in as much pain as I had been before the surgery, and I couldn't understand why. And when I went back to the surgeon, the doctor, that's when he sort of said, well, I think you might have, but in the UK, it wasn't formally recognised then through the health service. So I have a diagnosis that isn't a technical diagnosis in the eyes of our National Health Service, whereas it's something that's been very much more recognised in the US for a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the journey of learning about grief taught me to understand why the fibromyalgia manifested itself as it did at that time, because it didn't do it suddenly. It was there from my childhood.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was a big learning. And actually, that was reading masses at the library that came from the US, because there was no information here in the UK to read. So I had to read and read and read to learn what I was experiencing so that I could learn how to master living with it. But it was when I did my grief training that I changed how I lived with it. And although it's there in a very tiny element, it no longer rules my life. It no longer impacts my life and stops me living.
Yeah.
And that was actually recognizing grief and acknowledging grief.
So you would say definitely recognize, literally stopping, recognizing what's going on with you is step one to
hugely. You have to look at, What's going on with your, if you have constant, I mean, this is something else I experienced, constant throat problems. This is your speaking organ. It's where your words come out. So if your unconscious mind is saying you're not going to say those things, you get a sore throat, you get a cough, you get a tickle, because your lungs are reacting to your unconscious mind going, well, we've got to find a way to stop her talking. We've got to stop a way to find her, to stop her expressing herself. So how do we do that? Well, we'll just make her unwell. So our words then cause our health. Our thoughts cause our health.
Yep.
And there are old phrases, you know, I've got a tummy that's not feeling comfortable. You know, my stomach's churning. Well, what do we know about the gut brain now? We know that there's that third brain, and it's our gut.
Yes.
Because there is the nerve that goes from the brain all the way through the body down into the gut. So if the gut is upset because the mind is upset, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
You know, my stomach's churning. I feel uncomfortable. I don't feel safe to say those words. I'm going round and round and round in our stomach. It's our body trying to tell us, slow down, think about what you're doing, acknowledge what you're experiencing. And had I not had these experiences myself, I wouldn't be able to say categorically that you can change how your body behaves by changing how you think, by changing where you're looking through that lens, by changing your perception, and by learning who you are, learning to understand you and acknowledge what you've experienced, so that you can then be compassionate to yourself and forgive yourself.
Yes.
And apologize to yourself. Because when you can start doing those things, you can start making massive change in your life. It gives you space for gratitude. Hence all these post-it notes, because I'm having a bit of fun in a gratitude challenge over the next fortnight. So we write all the experiences down that we have gratitude for and put them on post-it notes. So my door behind me is covered in post-it notes.
Which is a great thing.
You know? Yeah. But, you know, the thing is, when you look at those things later, gratitude begets good things.
Yeah.
So when you look at those little notes, you can look at them and go, yeah, actually, there's so much more to those few words I wrote. There's so much more to every experience we have, but we close the door to it because we forget to acknowledge it. The good ones and the bad ones. And I'll tell you a funny story about the gallstone. So, as I said, I worked in dentistry then. That was my previous profession. And I was front of house in the reception, looking after the patients. But the man who was my surgeon also happened to be a patient at the dental practice. And at my bedside, he said, I've only seen 2 of these in 24 years, the stone, you know, singular stones. They're quite unusual. And then when I went back to work, he purposely waited until I went back to work, made an appointment, walked in, all bright and breezy in his lovely long dark coat. Oh, it's so lovely to see you with your clothes on. And I sat there for a moment and I just went, oh, lovely. And then the reception was over there, the patients all waiting, but there was a wall. So I had to come out from my desk, walk around the back of him and just put my head around and say, that's the man who's just stuck holes in me. So they all understand, you know, so they all understood what he was talking about. And it was such a lovely thing because it was all done very tongue-in-cheek, but you could see the looks of consternation.
I'm sure people were like,
Yeah, exactly. And then when I told them he was the man that's just made holes in me, they were all like, okay.
The surgeon. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't letting him get away with that.
No, oh my goodness, no. Everyone was going to have a story to tell.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. So yes, but but these are the things I was able to acknowledge the humor in it.
Yes.
I could have got really upset. I could have been, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I could see the twinkle in his eye and that slight mischievous grin. And he knew full well what he was doing. But he also gave me the opener to make some fun out of what had actually been a truly terrifying experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, his words to me were, this gallstone has been created for all the extreme stress and distress you've been experiencing. Your body didn't know what to do with it, so it just collected it up like a wasp hive. They collect in a ball.
Yes.
And it was very similar to that. And he said, you can't have it. It's gone to the lab. I want to know what's inside. So, and I never heard the results, but, he taught me something in that moment, that the experiences I hadn't been able to express and acknowledge, except in my fear and my guilt and my shame and all the other things, all the other emotions that I was experiencing in that time, were all having a massive impact on my body. And it was the very beginning of how I started looking at how I was caring for myself emotionally as well as physically.
Yes. Yeah, and I've talked about self-care a bit, and I think sometimes people mention things that are really like maintenance, right? Your hair, your nails, your makeup. That is like maintenance, your outward appearance. But what I want people to see is there's these other parts, right? And I think that acceptance, right? Getting to a place and feeling along the way. Especially through grief. It's not linear. It comes up when it wants to. And if you don't make the space to feel, it gets tough. I had a tough grief day thinking about my grandma yesterday, and I cried for about 45 minutes in therapy and then some after. And what I would normally do is go to sleep or get a drink or do something to distract me. And I said, no, you're going to feel. As hard as it is, right? You're at home, you're safe, you got hours before you need to pick up your kids from school. Just feel.
Yes.
And accept that it just is.
Mm-hmm.
Your sadness, right? This sad moment about your grandma is not good or bad. It just is. And it's connected to your love, right, for her and your care for her. And so if I didn't grieve, right, and if it didn't continuously pop up, like that means maybe nothing was there, right? And I said, I will accept sadness over anger. Because if Absolutely. I had the anger, that also tells me something, right? And usually that's some guilt, some shame, some right? It leads me to other feelings. And I'm like, the sadness is really like, I miss her presence, I miss talking to her. There's so much happening in the world. And in my little world, I would love to tell her about and have her to hear about and see.
But you can.
Podcast, right? And and that was the thing that I write. I can share that.
You can.
In it.
When my dad died of breast cancer in 2013. And when my dad died, for a long time afterwards, and a lot of people say, oh, no, but then a lot of other people go, oh, yes, I've experienced that. For a long time afterwards, I could smell his pipe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was very, very strong because as a child, one of my privileges, and it was a privilege because I didn't see my dad much in my childhood. My parents divorced when I was very young. So when I spent time with my dad, one of our big trips was going to the tobacconist to buy the tobacco, and my job was mixing it as it went into the jar because there were 2 or 3 different types of tobacco for his own blend. So then my hands would smell of the oils of the tobacco. I would be doused in the smell of the tobacco as I'd been doing this in the jar. And then he would be smoking it and I would smell it. There's a very famous advert from my childhood of the Bruno, the pipe smoker, and people would always know it was Bruno if they were behind him. But because I had that connection with my father and his pipe, I could always tell what tobacco people were smoking. It was most bizarre. Not a thing I would say I was very proud of, but I didn't know any different as a child.
Yeah.
But my dad had stopped smoking his pipe 5 years before. So I hadn't actively, in that last 5 years of his life, smelt the pipe. When he died, my senses brought back the pipe. So every time I just started talking to him as if he was there. And I yelled at him, and I cried at him, and I berated him, and I laughed at him. So there's nothing that will stop you from having those conversations with your grandmother whenever you want.
Yeah.
Because that is your way of getting those words out and acknowledging the experience you've had. And actually, I absolutely believe that they're always with us somehow or some way.
Yes.
So they will always hear us.
Yes.
And you can always ask for a sign as well. It's amazing how many signs come when you're not expecting.
Yes, that's true. That's true. There have been some like really interesting things that have like happened where I'm like, there's no way, like that was totally you. There's no way. There's no way. It's happened to me, my brother, my mom. I'm sure like the rest of my family we're like, okay, I see you, girl. Very uniquely her. Only something that she could do. And so I think that's true. And I think when we're thinking about this conversation, it's just, accepting what is. And in that, healing through it and focusing on like your healing. And I think when we were talking right before we started to record, you were saying this really beautiful thing about how it's important to focus on us and ourselves and what we can control, because when we're dealing with this estrangement, right, or this alienation or this distance, or maybe even like a challenge, right, where you're not talking to each other, you think there's something I can do about it. And so a lot of your focus goes on like what you can do to change this other person's mind. And you said this really beautiful thing that was really like, you actually can't do that. You have to focus on you. And so I don't know if you remember exactly what you said, but would you mind?
I don't think I ever do.
It was beautiful. Yeah. Like for anybody who's like dealing with this and obviously holding out hope for reconciliation, what would you tell them, particularly around like how focusing on themselves and focusing on their healing can help?
Well, the first thing I'd tell them is actually sit down and journal it out, write it down. Because there's good scientific evidence that shows getting one of these or a pen and writing helps us to get the thoughts, feelings, and emotions out of our head and onto paper so that we can focus on them in a different way. You don't have to write reams and reams and reams, just write a bullet list. What are the things that are troubling you about what happened in that breakdown of that relationship? What are the things you think you need answers to? Write them down. Because it allows you then to look at that list that you've got there in front of you and go, okay, so what are the thoughts, feelings, and emotions around this entry? So this is where you'd sit and just really focus on yourself, and you just sort of sit quietly and just ask your unconscious mind to guide you, to help you to acknowledge the things you've experienced. And what else is there I need to know? You can ask your mind at any time, what else is there I need to know? Because you know what's going on here is always going to bring up what you need to know.
The I Only Listen to 90s Music podcast is a show for 80s babies who were 90s kids. If you were a No Limit soldier, then this is your show. If you believe that Cash Money is not an army but was a Navy, this is the show for you. If you and your friends ever tried to sing a song written by Escape In Vogue, Shy, or Boyz II Men at a talent show during middle school, this is your show. The I Only Listen to 90s Music podcast is a bunch of 80s babies talking about all the songs and things that we loved when we were kids and teenagers. So if you went to the skating rink and you were at a lock-in, this is the show for you. If you think that Tevin Campbell was the original Prince of R&B, this is the show for you. If you don't understand the conflict between Monica and Brandy, but you're kind of on Monica's side and understand why Brandy got punched, this is the show for you. Make sure that you tune in, subscribe, click the little subscribe link. We're here. We're going to talk about all things 90s music. This is the show for you.
Yes.
And you'll often be in a situation and something will happen and a whole pile of thoughts will come into your head. But it's because you need to know those things at that moment in time. And then it's how you process those things. So if you've had this experience, sit yourself down and allow yourself to think about it so that you can actually, I feel fear, I feel guilt, I feel shame, I feel abandoned, unwanted, unloved, uncared for. So then you can look at each word in process and say, what is the fear I'm feeling? Why am I feeling this fear? What's the fear? One of the things for me was that I couldn't protect my daughter from what was happening. And the guilt was strange because I couldn't put the word guilt to it. Because I was doing the best I could at the time with what I had at hand. I didn't have the finances. I didn't have a home. I actually sofa surfed for the first few weeks after I was forced out of the marital home. So, for me, the priority was actually putting a roof over my head, having somewhere to put my clothes and having somewhere to get clean every day. Because I was impacting other people's lives by being on their sofas.
Yeah.
And no matter how much gratitude I have for those 3 sofas that I shared, the best form of gratitude was being able to care for myself. And at that point, I couldn't. So you have to sit and go through all these things and acknowledge and actually say, I felt this. Why did I feel that? And then you can work out where it comes from. Did it come from an experience I've only had as an adult? Did it come from an experience I had in my childhood that's long forgotten, long unseen, long unknowledged? Because up until the age of 7, we don't have our own language. We have the language of all the adults around us. So we can't express ourselves. And often, like you, feeling abandoned, feeling left behind, we swallow down those words into our bodies and we get that uneasy feeling in our tummy and that ache in our heart and that sore throat or the earache because we don't want to hear what other people are saying to us. And so we create another story, which is this belief that isn't true. And everybody says, oh, it's really easy to find limiting beliefs. It's only really easy to find them if you have help. You can't just sit and find them on your own because so much is stored away in here that to undo it all yourself you'd go slightly mad, if not more so.
It takes time to figure out what the limiting belief is, because I've done that work. And it really started with, okay, what is my head? What is swirling around in my head right now? And doing that multiple times and then going back and looking. And the scary part was going back to look the first time.
But also, did you find
down?
Yeah. So did you find that there were similarities between each of the whirlpools of words?
Yes.
So there'd be words that linked each one of those series of experiences you had. There'd be a word that links them all up. Yeah.
Yes.
And that is where they come from, because they come from our childhood. Because you see, when we're tiny, the only person we have in our life that is mirroring how to be is our mother, our father, possibly our grandparents if they live in the same home, possibly older children. But we could be the eldest child. I'm the eldest child, so I didn't have an example of another child to follow.
Mm-hmm.
My father was pretty much absent in my very tiny years, so my mother was the person that was mirroring. My mother was very sick and coping with distress of what was going on in my father's world. So she was very stressed and distressed. She had lots of chest and lung issues. She smoked. She didn't help. And she had very young children. She had me. My brother was born less than a year before he was born 5 days before my first birthday. She had a miscarriage in between. Then she had my middle brother. Then she had a slightly longer, and then she had my baby brother. So 64, 65, she had live babies. 66 was a miscarriage. 67 was my middle brother. And early 69, February Valentine's, was my last baby brother.
Wow.
So she was ill. Her body was impacted by childbirth. She had the external stuff going on from my father. She had her own fears and grief and all of the stuff she was carrying. What was she mirroring to me? All of it.
Yes.
So I was absorbing all of that energy that I was seeing, that I was hearing, that I was smelling, that I was tasting, that I was sensing as a very tiny child. So I was learning how to be fearful before I'd even got a language of my own. Now, an awful lot of us have had that experience without understanding the impact that that experience has on us and how we then behave when we're older. Because if we don't know, we then go through the same cycles.
Yes.
And
Wow.
when I got married, the limiting belief in my head was, I'm not going through divorce the way my mother and father did, because my mother had 2 divorces. My father at that point had 4 divorces, and he was just going into his 5th marriage when I got married. So, yeah. And so I had all that stuff, and in my head, I'm not ever going to get divorced. So when things weren't so good in my relationship, there were several times when I stopped myself just walking. And I stayed and I stayed, and I used excuse after excuse to stay. I have to be here for my child. I have to do this for X. I have to look after X. Where did I come in that? I was last. Not once did I look at my own emotional health, my physical health, and the impact that that was having on my daughter and on my ex-husband. So there's this vicious circle going on then. And we've all done it without realizing we've done it.
Absolutely.
So we know nobody is to blame, but we're all responsible for how we then deal with what we are carrying around. So when it comes to, well, you can reconnect with your child, you can only do that if you've done the work on yourself. Because if you go back to the child with all that anger, all that bitterness, all that upset and hurt and pain and fear and shame and guilt, what are you mirroring to your adult child? Because they're mirroring all of that back to you.
Yeah.
And you're just going to keep bouncing off each other. So your adult child is responsible for sorting their stuff out, and you're responsible for sorting your stuff out. And when you change the energy around you, the energy around them is going to change, because there's this lovely thing we're taught about in science when we're at school. It's that little tiny thing called an atom. And atoms keep moving all around the world all the time. So if we're changing the atoms that we're pushing off every day, They're going to travel around the world, and eventually they're going to hit their mark. We don't know when, but all we can do is send all those little atoms off with love and compassion and forgiveness and apologies, not with spite and nastiness and anger, because it's not going to get us anywhere. And if we keep saying that they're responsible, then we're giving away our power. We can't give away our power. We have to empower ourselves by learning who we are, by clearing out the stuff and learning to blossom and grow. Because when that happens, things change. But our children have to take responsibility for themselves to do the same thing. For young children, it's different. For young children, they're in the thrall of another adult parent or grandparent, because sometimes that's what that's what happens.
Yes.
So they've got their own stuff going on, and that's influencing how that child is being held back. So you can't blame a young child either, because they're doing what they have to do to stay safe.
Yeah.
And they can't be responsible for all of the things that the adults are foisting on them.
Yep. This is good. This is like, so I'm thinking about just like how many different areas of life this is really helpful for. And I think as you were talking, the one thing I was thinking is I'm sure that parents who are going through this are like, focus on myself and my healing. I want my child back. I want that relationship back. I want them back in my life so we can do this together. Right. And what would you say to that? Based on your experience and like how you're coaching folks through that, like I had this deep desire, you know.
I have that deep desire. I do want my daughter back in my life. I want to know my grandchildren. They're 10 and coming up 8. And I don't know them. I only met my eldest grandchild 5 times. She was 5 months old the last time I saw her. So she has a memory of me imprinted on her, as I have a memory of her imprinted on me. But I know no more, as does she. So I would love to be able to share. I'd love to be able to share my beautiful family history with her. I'd love to be able to share the fun and the joy of life with her. But until my daughter finds that space for herself to be brave and unearth all the stuff that she's carrying around that's painful, then there's never going to be the joining of the ways. We have to be responsible for ourselves and really dig deep within ourselves. Sometimes, depending on certain circumstances where there are abuses and things involved, drugs and things like that, our children aren't always able to manage the things they're experiencing. So we have to give space for that. We can't just blame, because blame doesn't do anybody any good. Blame is like throwing stones. It's a little bit that thing, we'll drink the poison and wait for the other person to fall over and die. Where if we're drinking the poison, the only person we're hurting is ourselves.
Yeah.
And actually, we need to stop drinking the poison, and we need to start being compassionate to ourselves. And it's amazing what changes when you learn how to forgive yourself and how to apologize to yourself. And forgiveness and apologies are very, very closely related. Sometimes you can say the same thing, but just change the word forgive to apologize, or apologize to forgive.
Yeah.
And it will take on a whole new meaning. But the day you start to be compassionate towards yourself is the day that things can change. And sometimes you'll see massive shifts and you'll go, hey, how did that happen? And other times it can be very subtle, but other people will notice it. Yeah. And that's the power of how we grow within ourselves.
I love that. So what are some next steps? How can people connect with you? What do you have coming up that people can like get involved in if they need this? Or if they just want to learn more?
So on the 22nd of March, I'm running a workshop, a one-day breakthrough workshop, and it's based on grief, and it's based on the principles of how we understand the grief we're experiencing ourselves. And there'll be learning in there to learn how to make changes. There'll be small steps to begin with because it's only a 5-hour workshop, but it's a start to looking after ourselves and learning how to move forward in life in a really powerful and healthy way. So I'm purposely running it on an afternoon UK time because I know that there will be people from all around the US and Canada and various other places who want to come along. So I'm purposely doing it in the afternoon UK so that everybody can be involved. So you can connect with me on Facebook. You can either look for me personally or my business page, Debi Richens, The Relationship Phoenix, or just Debi Richens. Follow me. I talk about the same stuff on my personal page as the business page. So, you'll get it in both places. Talk to me. Ask me questions, send me private messages. Send me questions on the posts I write. Answer the questions on the posts I write. Get involved. Don't be afraid. And if you're fearful of saying something publicly, send it to me privately. But you can also connect with me on Instagram as well. And you can do exactly the same there. If you're fearful of saying it in the public, say it to me privately. Because just sometimes sharing your fears and the guilt you feel and the shame you feel is enough to lift the lid on the very first steps of healing. Because it's about how you grow your confidence. So don't be afraid to talk to me. I've had a lot of experiences in my life, a lot of very unusual experiences. And that's not because I want to be better than anyone else, because I didn't choose any of those things to happen. They all just came and happened.
Yeah.
But I've learned so much from them. I've learned so much about me. I've learned so much about other people. I've seen how I've not strived to survive, how I've survived and not thrived because of the experiences. But I now thrive because I understand what I went through. So we all have those experiences in our lives. And it's how we change them. But the first step is connection with somebody else who's talking the same language as you, who can give you that space. And that's what the workshop is about giving you that space. It will be completely secure. You'll be with like-minded people. And I'm excited about how you can open your life up. A little bit like that butterfly in the chrysalis that then sheds that little shell and spreads its wings and suddenly shakes itself out and just starts to appreciate its life.
Yeah.
Because we can all do that. But we have to sometimes be guided how.
It's hard to do by yourself, I would say. And so I like that you are opening that space, that you were intentional about the time, so that people can join. So you all, I will tell you, she's lovely to chat with, as you can see. Very passionate, very understanding. And I love the focus on self. It is not selfish to focus on yourself. It's honestly the only thing that you can control. And so I hope you all took notes. I hope that you listen to this again, and maybe save this and come back to it, because depending on where you are, sometimes it's hard to hear it, right? Like you're like, no, I want, right? Come back and revisit this when also again and again and again when you can hear. I got so many nuggets. I am not going through this particular situation, but I know people that are. And I thought it was so important to have you on. And I definitely would love to have you back one day, because I think there's so much that I can apply to my life right now, to very different situations, particularly thinking about this generational thing. when you talked about your mom, right, and her experience, what was mirrored back to you, and then, you know, then you're like, and here I am, right, in a similar sort of like situation. And I was just doing what unconsciously was there. I think we can all benefit from that work. And I think we can all not only become better people for ourselves, but just in relationship to other people. And so I'm so grateful for your time. Also, the Post-it notes behind you is like, yes, we're going to do that here. I'm going to do that and start keeping track of things I'm grateful for. And I think we can all pick that up too. I think that's something we can all start today, is writing down things we're grateful for. And
do you know what? I'd love it if everybody shared their gratitude notes with me. Yeah. They don't have to share them publicly. They can inundate me with them privately. Yes. Maybe I'll start a group.
Oh my gosh, I would love that, just to be able to like send you like, look at my Post-it notes. I'm excited. I'm so excited about that, because I actually think at any given day, any part of the world, right, anybody's piece of the world could feel really chaotic. And when you look at Post-it notes, whether you all do different colors or not, when you look, you get to look at things that you're grateful for, and it moves your mood into a space of gratitude, and you start to see things differently. And so I love that. I will definitely be sending you my gratitude. And again, sharing my gratitude again here for you. So you all make sure you like, subscribe, follow, definitely connect with Debi. Of course, continue to connect here. I think we can definitely have more conversations about this for sure. I am so appreciative of this conversation and just how transformational it's been for me today, and super excited for everyone else. So let us know in the comments, of course, any questions. I'll make sure that they get to you, so that maybe we can come back and like do a part 2 and focus on answering questions folks have.
I have a lot of gratitude for you asking me on. It's been an amazing conversation. You've allowed me to be passionate in a way that not everybody does, because some people say you're too much, but you know, we're never too much when we're expressing how valuable change is, you know, and actually how valuable taking charge of our own change is.
Yes.
We're never going to have a change in our lives if we don't take responsibility for ourselves. We can't keep expecting someone else to pluck the rainbow out of the sky for us. We have to do it ourselves.
Gotta go make it.
So yeah, I have lots of gratitude for you giving me that space, and I would love to come back.
Perfect. I'd love to have you back. And yes, of course, I invited you on for you to share your passions and your experience. And I hope people hear your heart. And I love how you have taken some challenges in your life, taken charge of that, taken the responsibility you have, forgiven yourself, and use that to fuel purpose. And that's literally what I'm doing here with this. So you were in good company. I hope you felt like you were in good company as well. And, yeah, y'all I'll be back. I'll have more guests. We'll have you back on, of course, and make sure you check out the description so you can figure out exactly where to find Debi. Definitely join the challenge if you can. Sign up and do the workshop. I plan to be there. So right now,
I have an offer as well until the 19th of March. In UK, it's £97. So in US dollar, that's $125. But I would like to offer it at $115 until the 19th of March.
Okay.
So for any of your listeners, if they'd like to take part in the challenge, up until the 19th of March, it will be $115. They need to send me a private message, because it will be an individual link for each person. So the private message for the code will be DOMPOD. And then I'll know where they've come from, and I'll know what offer I'm giving them.
Yes, perfect. All right.
Okay, so DOMPOD will give them until the 19th, $115. Otherwise, it will then go up to $195 from the midnight of the 19th through to the 21st, which is the equivalent of the UK price.
Perfect. All right. So hopefully you all listened all the way through to get that discount. We love that. And thank you for offering that.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
I know it's so needed for so many people. So I am excited to participate and excited for other listeners to participate. And with that, I'm going to let you go off and have a good rest of your weekend and your evening, because you are 6 hours ahead of me.
Yes, so it's just coming up to 6:30 p.m. here.
Dinner time.
Yes.
Definitely enjoy your evening, enjoy your weekend, and I will be chatting with you soon for sure. And thank you all for joining in and taking a listen to the Uncaped Mama podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome.